after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all here. Thanks for showing up. You're here for the first time. What brings you here? I saw you first, so you're the winner.
I was invited from the kids.
Right on.
It was very enlightening.
Very enlightening, yeah. Very enlightening. That must be a different night. So thanks for showing up on a Tuesday. Glad you're here. Who else? First time I saw a hand somewhere. Yeah, go ahead.
My wife brought me.
Say again?
My wife brought me.
Your wife brought you. What do you think that means?
I'm still trying to figure it out.
She probably just loves you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right on. I'm going to leave that one alone for now. Glad you're here. Somebody else, first time. Yeah. To learn what?
Tibetan meditation.
Oh, I can't teach you anything about Tibetan meditation, but I will still try to entertain you for the next hour. Yeah. Yeah. Glad you're here. Anyone else, first time? Yeah.
I had been to the recovery meeting and suggested that I come, and also I'd like to expand my spiritual practice, do a lot of yoga, things like that.
Yeah.
So I just want to expand my spiritual practice.
Right on. Well, welcome. Glad you're here. And yes, in the back.
My daughter brought me here.
No way. Right on. Your daughter's great. Glad you're here. Welcome. Thanks for claiming her. Anybody else? First time. Right on. Well, glad you're all here. It's kind of fun to just be in a new place or come back to a regular place and just sit. Because we're alive and life could be so much worse. Anyone think they're having a rough time with life these days? Only one. Your honesty I always love, so I'm glad you're here. Yeah, life can get rough. It really can. It gets difficult. It gets challenging. It becomes hectic. And it's always going to be that way. That never changes. You know, for those who are brand new to Buddhism, or this is night one, or whatever it might be, I mean, it's the first thing this guy said, which is life is filled with dukkha, suffering, discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction. This is what we get throughout our lives. It doesn't mean all of life sucks, but it means that throughout your life, every single day, you're going to experience pain. Some heavy and traumatic, and some simple. But that's what we get every single day. And so this practice is learning to be with this discomfort as it arises. Because what we often try to do with discomfort is flee the scene, run, kicking, yelling, screaming, help. And this practice is learning within reason, of course, as long as it's safe, but learning to be with the chaos as it arises. Because once you get through whatever difficulty you're faced with right now, what do you think's waiting for you?
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2, exactly. And it just keeps going. You know, at any point in your life, you probably said, you know, I'm never going to make it through this. Like, this is the hardest thing, right? You ever had those moments in your life where you're just like, I just can't get through this. I don't know how I'm going to make it. I don't know how I'm going to survive. I don't know how I'm going to live. I don't know how this is ever going to get behind me. And you know what? It did. Somehow. And here you are. And there will be more. That's the fun stuff. So the other thing is learning to just enjoy this crazy journey, because all the madness will always be there. And within all of that, there are beautiful moments of happiness and joy, and those are wonderful too. So, all right, and to those joining virtually, welcome. Glad you're all here. Feel free to chime in as you are. There's a chat box somewhere on your screen. We'll start with the meditation practice. For those who are new or maybe sitting for the first time, a couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you, right? You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit and we're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos, and this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you are in a cushion, whether you're here at home, wherever you are, often helps sliding the front third, push the stomach forward, allows the back to straighten. If you're on a bench or chair, however you're seated, just relaxing the shoulders, hands are on the knees or in the lap, just trying to sit up straight. I will say things periodically to remind you that you're lost in thought or wake you up because you have fallen asleep. And again, for those who are new, your mind is not going to shut off. It will not go blank and you will not think nothing. We're just going to sit and breathe. I'll guide us as we begin and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. And starting with the eyes closed, if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed, whatever's comfortable. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Returning attention, focus to the breath. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgments from the practice. Just sitting, breathing. Breathing in. Follow breath in. Breathing out. Follow breath out. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, wanting nothing but to sit and breathe. The body is still, rested. And the speech quiet, aware of all sounds. And the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. Slowly opening the eyes. Slowly beginning to move. The most important, the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how you sit, hold the hands across the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samupata, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us. He began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in and where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's it. That's what we get every single day. This practice is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your days. So all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. This practice is not easy. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. It's direct perception into the present moment. And as I alluded to earlier, the present moment is filled with chaos, conflict, difficulty, challenges. And this is learning to be with them as they arise. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. Sitting, breathing, learning to be kind to yourself and everybody else you encounter every moment of your life. Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything around us, we work on changing our mind and our reactions to the world around us, life gets simpler. But it is a practice. It's not a quick fix. It's not a 6-week course. It's not 2 months and then everything is all better. It is a lifelong practice. Your entire life will be filled with difficulties and challenges. And this practice is helping us face all of them with kindness and compassion towards ourselves and others. People will always frustrate you. They will always bother you. They will always annoy you. They will always trigger you if you let them. And that's up to you. It's not up to them. It's up to you. And how much you want to let people control your mind like that. It's amazing how miserable we can make ourselves all on our own. Just some random thought without even knowing anything. And all of a sudden, we'll spend 3 hours creating a story, and then we're just so angry, ready to just explode at something or someone. We don't even know what happened. But our head just made it all up for 3 hours. And it's a good story. We believe it. We're convinced we're right. We've changed it a few times, but when it's our own story in our own head for 3 hours, we can do whatever we want. And then we settle on some conclusion of what it is, and then we throw it at everybody else. We make them deal with it. Those poor people. I know none of you do that to anyone ever. I'm just talking about everybody else who does that to you all day long. So this practice is learning to let go of the stories that you told yourself your whole life about everything that's wrong with everybody else. And focusing on how you respond to other people. So with that, I think I'll just pause. For me, I really just prefer to respond to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything that's on your mind. And we'll use the rest of our brief time this evening and I'll respond to questions, thoughts. And again, if you're joining virtually, feel free, there's a chat box somewhere on your screen, so feel free to chime in there with any thoughts or questions, and assuming I can read it, I'll do my best to respond. Yeah, sorry.
Question just feeding off of what you're just saying, like the stories that we create. I have a hard time figuring out for myself, like to just be still and let the story show to me versus like confronting it and saying, this is what I'm telling myself, is it true? Like, how much do you go seeking an answer to confirm or, deny versus just sit and watch?
Yeah, that's a hard one because the person that you're using, based on the example you just gave, the person that you're going to use from what you just said, or at least the way I heard it, to confirm if your story is true, is the same person who created the story. I can tell by the smirk on your face that none of you can see that might make sense to you, right? So here I am creating a story in my head about how I think things should be or how they might be. And then after an hour of creating that, then I'm going to step over here and be like, so Jeff, is that story correct? Of course it is. I just made it up. So I think there's a balance there. And I hear you on the question of like
what do you do?
Right. We spend all day long, and there are stories, just to give it some context, completely related but unrelated to what you're saying. There are stories in our head that we make up all day long that protect us and keep us safe. So there's a story in my head that if there's a lot of traffic outside, I shouldn't run across the street in all of the traffic if I want to stay safe. That's a story. I don't need to test that, right? So I know that to be true, based on logic, based on reason, based on experience. Not that I've ever played Frogger and dodged cars, but just the understanding that I probably shouldn't do that. I think we have to ask ourselves, is the story you've just created, do you have any logic behind it? Is there any truth to it? Is it something that keeps occurring? I know every time if I run out in the street and there's a lot of cars, I'm going to risk getting hurt. So there's some advantage and value to a story, but I think the difference between what I'm describing, which to me is more just an awareness of patterns and behaviors, is very different from a story. A story is all tied up in our emotions, right? Like the whole car running, there's no emotion to that. That's not some emotional thing I'm wrapped up in. It just says, don't run across the street, it's dangerous. I don't need a story behind it. A story would be sitting there for an hour, who's driving the car? Why won't they let me cross the street? What kind of car are they driving? Where'd they get the car? What's going on in their life? Just don't run across the street and leave it at that. So I think this idea of being aware of the stories and not basing your whole life around them. And this idea of letting them play out, you can have an idea of what you think might occur, but it's never going to play out the way you think it will. Ever. Nothing plays out how we think it will. Even if it's remotely close, it'll still be different. If I sit down at a restaurant and I order pizza, I'm pretty sure pizza's coming. But whatever it tastes like is going to still be different from what I think it is. Because it can't possibly be what I think it is. Because thinking it tastes like something and actually eating it are two completely different things. So the story is not reality. Does that help at all? There's a balance. And you have to begin to know, I suggest you begin to know when the stories dominate your mind and become just too much. So then it might help to tone them down a little bit. And again, the Zen, not again, but for me again, because I feel like I say this every day, the Zen, specific Zen practice, there is no story at all. Because you're experiencing everything. The practice is to experience everything for the first time. So there is no story that ever gets created. There's just an experience of each moment. This moment of us all sitting here has never occurred and will never occur again. It is a completely different moment now than it was 30 seconds ago. And 30 seconds from now will be a completely different moment from what it is right now. And each one of those individual moments has never occurred. So there's no story to tell. There's just the experience of present moment. With an asterisk that says, don't go run in the street. So, yeah.
So what if the story that you're dealing with, let's say, is being vulnerable and repeatedly getting hurt for being vulnerable, and then creating a story in your head of the hurt and then wanting to leave?
So the question is, what if the story in your head is being vulnerable and you're repeatedly getting hurt because you're being vulnerable, and then the story is you want to leave because you don't want to repeatedly get hurt because you're vulnerable? Then leave. When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. The stories just torture you. The stories are not real. Be present in each moment. If this idea of I'm being so vulnerable, I keep getting hurt, then stop. Fear ruins us. Yeah. What else?
I have a question about, so where does storytelling come in?
Such as?
We tell the Buddha story
Yeah.
to remind us.
Yes. So that's your question. Okay, no, I didn't know if there was more to it. So the question was, where does storytelling come in? And then the follow-up to that was, we tell the Buddha story to remind us. Storytelling of, dare I say, factual events, according to something that occurred 2,500 years ago. But storytelling of actual events that occurred are incredibly beneficial to learn. I tell stories every single day to try to help myself and others practice and learn from our own greed, anger, and ignorance. But the difference, I think, in storytelling in the way you're asking about it versus 3 hours of being stuck in our head with some story that's emotionally torturing us is in the storytelling, there's no emotional attachment to it. Okay? That makes sense? You might have an emotional response from the story, but you're just telling the story. I make up stories all day long, but not attached to any of them. They don't have any impact. The story itself is not having an impact on me, such as 3 hours of telling myself a story in my head about how miserable something might be. That makes sense?
I'll stay with it.
Okay, yeah.
I have a question. How would you, something else?
No, you're good. Go ahead, yeah.
How would you guide someone who's having trouble moving through grief of loss, life,
Yeah.
losing somebody?
So the question was how to guide someone who's dealing with grief and loss of life. So I always default to Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings on death. I think his approach to them is brilliant. No birth, no death, no coming, no going. One cannot die. And in fact, I just put up something he wrote very beautifully, and I think it actually was in the later years of his life. But his teachings on clouds becoming the rain and the water and going into the earth and bringing up the soil and the flowers and everything, that everything just changes form. So very specifically in Buddhist teachings, we are attached to physical form. we think that this physical form, like I, Jeff, this is it. This is me. This is my life. Well, there's just consciousness, as the Buddha taught. It's called Alaya Vijnana, storehouse consciousness, which is a collection of all of your actions. Even if you don't believe in rebirth or reincarnation or any of that, fine, let's just stick to one life. Your mind has been with you this whole life. And we think that when we physically die, that that's the end of it. But Buddhist teachings from India 2,500 years ago say that that consciousness continues. But we're stuck thinking that this form is us. So the dealing with loss really begins with understanding that you can't ever lose anything or anyone, because you never had them in the way you think you have them. The second way to look at it is, where do people really live? Where do they live? In our head, along with all the other crap, right? So when they die, we can't hug them, we can't hold them, we can't tell them we love them, we can't tell them we miss them, we can't do any of that kind of stuff. But they live in our mind, they live in our hearts, they live through our actions. People don't die, they just change. Yeah, Thich Nhat Hanh stuff on this is brilliant. Yeah.
Glasses again.
Oh, that's right. You were over there last time. So
That's right.
Moving closer though, it'll be easier.
Yeah, didn't work. But,
Yeah.
so I'm trying to phrase this right. So you go through things in your life and you have experiences, and to some degree, whether you like it or not, there's a story or a narrative in your mind of what happened, because that's just your memory. And then you go, if someone goes through trauma or has experiences that they haven't emotionally processed well, how do you know when, or how do you suggest knowing when you are needing to reprocess the experience again with someone like a counselor or a therapist or something like that? Or, how do you decide if you need to process, or if you're processing over and over again and you're getting to a point of rumination, because there's some profiteering that can happen in psychology in that area. How do you know when it's time for unattachment and time for acceptance and time for present time awareness? Where do you balance? Where do you suggest?
If you're asking that question, you probably need more work.
Okay.
If you're asking for yourself. You're sitting in a room filled with people that have unresolved trauma and have a lot of processing to do. So I always talk about, for those who've never heard this before, therapy, wonderful, beautiful, incredibly beneficial. If you're in it, don't stop it. If you're on meds, don't give them up. And then there's Buddhist practice. They're very different, super different, right? I often joke and say half the people in here are in therapy, the other half are therapists, and half of the therapists are in therapy, right? So welcome to Buddhism. People don't come to this path because they're perfectly peaceful and happy. They would have just kept on walking by, right? Unless they were dragged here by somebody, So
my question in that is, where do you balance?
I understand your question. And you keep balancing until you find the balance. As you said, even in the way you phrased and changed your question, how do I know? You said, where do I suggest? I don't know.
Okay.
Nobody can answer that question for you. But I would just begin to watch, like, hey, is this therapy, do I feel like I'm making some progress here? And then I'm going to look at Buddhist teachings that says, present moment. I can relive this trauma in my head for the next 30 years of my life, and I can process it with a therapist for the next 30 years of my life and spend $80,000. Or I can recognize this happened, and all the processing in the world isn't going to change it. It's just going to make me relive it over and over and over again. That's where you're at, right? Over and again, I'm no offense to the therapists in the room, do your job, and those in therapy stay in therapy. But there does reach a point in time where you potentially, maybe it's time for a different therapist, or maybe it's time for a change in approach or practice. Because what happens is, my master 20 years ago said, Jeff, busy is the best nutrition. I just stayed busy. There was no need to sit and process my entire life for me as a practitioner. That was my personal approach. I just said, this is what I've done for the first 30 years of my life. Wow, what a mess. And this is what I've done for the next, 20 years of my life. Way less of a mess. I'm just going to keep doing this stuff. I'm not going to spend forever trying to dig up every little thing I've done. I'm pretty well aware of it, and it sucked, and it wasn't right, and it wasn't cool, and I can't change it. And all the therapy in the world wouldn't make it better. I would potentially just dwell in it and then hate myself for all the crap I did. And then somehow try to blame everybody else for it, and then maybe take ownership of it, and then eventually just go do good stuff. So I'm just going to go do good stuff. Yeah. So therapists would have a field day with me, man. I'm not going there. Yeah, what else? Questions?
Aren't you kind of in that situation to practice
Sorry.
forgiveness?
Say again?
Work on forgiveness.
Yeah, forgiveness is key. I mean, forgiveness always starting with the self and then towards others. Forgiving ourselves. My master always said that when we do things we shouldn't do, to ask for forgiveness for what we've done. If it's appropriate to ask the person for forgiveness, great. If it's somebody you hurt like 20 years ago, they're over it, and just because you're having some come to whatever moment, they don't need to hear from you. Be like, yo, remember when I hurt you 30 years ago? I just wanted to apologize now. They're good. Okay? So then apologize to somebody else potentially, right? Then recognize too that what you've done was not coming from a place of kindness, compassion, generosity, morality, any of that stuff too. And 3, vow to yourself to not do it again. So a lot of times what people I find in these situations are looking for is somebody to listen to them and tell you you're okay. But then you just keep doing the same shit over and over again. You're like, why am I not okay? Stop doing the same things you're doing. If you want to change, just stop. And I know that sounds, it's easier said than done, I get it. But if you want things to change, you can't just process. If you want to change, you must change. And not just be, hugged and pat on the back saying, it's okay. But then you're just going to keep doing the same stuff. Yeah.
So you mentioned that we won't have any mystical experiences first go, but then it made me wonder whether you had any mystical experiences, and so what was the most,
Yeah. So your question is, just to repeat for those who didn't hear, that I mentioned at the beginning of the meditation that you won't have any mystical experiences. And your question is for me if I've ever had any mystical experiences.
Yeah, what would be your most intense experience?
My most magical experience, nothing. Was realizing what a mess my head is, right? I've been doing this 28 years, every single day for the last 25. No. 20, sorry. Every day. Nothing has ever happened to me. I've never had any mystical, magical experience. I've never figured anything out. Sitting and breathing with all your mess is just sitting and breathing. And that's it. And the most incredible thing that's ever happened to me is learning to just sit and breathe. That's it. Yeah. I set the bar real low. I'm serious too. I'm not just trying to humble myself. I'm just some dude who's done a lot of stuff I shouldn't have done. and I stopped doing most of it. Still working on the rest. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
We talk about forgiving ourselves, but what if someone is a monster? How do you forgive someone that has messed up your life in a way that you feel like you can never get back?
Yeah. The question is, thank you all for being here. Good to see you. The question is, how do you not forgive the monster?
So you're allowed to not forgive.
No, that's not where I think. The question is, how can you not? Meaning, so let me back up for a minute. Having sat with people in this type of stuff who've raped and been raped, those who've murdered, those who've committed just horrific crimes, violence, abuse on both sides. Forgiveness is for you, first and foremost. When I say how can you not, what I mean by that is when an act occurred, no matter how horrific it was, if you don't forgive them, your heart will break your entire life. I'll share a story with you, and I don't ever like to compare like levels of trauma or abuse or pain, but this one's up there, and I personally can't imagine too many being worse than this. But again, it's not really fair to compare. His name is Azim Kamiza. I talk about this usually once every few months. Are you familiar with Tariq Kamiza Foundation, Azim Kamiza's story? So I'll sum it up in about 3 minutes. Azim Kamiza, I worked with him intimately about 20 years ago for like 2 years. Back in the 90s, I believe it was, his son, Tariq Kamiza, was a 20-year-old kid at San Diego State. And at the time, a 14-year-old kid named Tony Hicks, gang member, was told that as part of his initiation into the gang, he had to murder somebody. So they ordered a pizza. Tariq shows up, delivery driver. Tony goes up to the window, 14 years old, rolls the window down to get his pizza. Tony shoots him in the head. Okay? It made huge news back then because he was the first juvenile tried as an adult in the state of California. He was 14 again. Azim, shortly thereafter, like weeks, maybe weeks to like a month, reached out to the grandfather of Tony. Mother wasn't in the picture. Grandfather was taking care of him. Tony was in jail now, in an act of forgiveness. And they started a foundation called the Tariq Kamiza Foundation to teach forgiveness and nonviolence. And I get goosebumps every time I tell the story. For about 20 years, Azim, whose son was murdered, and Plez, the grandfather, would go into schools with kids. And they would both sit on the stage. And the person behind them would say, this man's son was murdered by this man's grandson. And she would draw a line showing where the bullet passed through his son's head. And said, they are here in an act of forgiveness. And Azim's message always was he saw victims at both ends of the gun. His son, his life, his family was impacted. And Tony, for growing up in a society that we built, all of us, that allows a 14-year-old kid to get access to a gun, to feel that that's the only way he can belong, is by joining this gang, and to murder somebody. Azim spent 20 plus years fighting to get Tony out of prison. They became best of friends. About a year ago, roughly, a year and a half maybe, Tony finally got released. And now the two of them, because Azim used to always say, How cool would it be if we can do this together and go into schools and I can say, this man now, he's probably 40-something years old, murdered my son. And here he is as my brother. And I love him and I hug him and I forgive him because I have to. Because if I don't forgive him, I want to die. He reached out immediately. That was his message. I can't imagine too many things. Like I said, I don't want to compare stuff. Not right to do that, but that's pretty intense. And if this human could forgive that, it shows me that forgiveness is possible on any level. And TKF. So I think last thing I'll say on that is that the biggest part of Azim, and for him, very religious man, Muslim faith, that was really important to him, that he just felt the most beautiful thing in his heart that he could do for his own peace of mind and sanity was to forgive Tony. And it allowed him to live his life. Every day missing his son. Every day wishing his son were there. Every day wishing that it never happened. But forgiving Tony. Because this cycle repeats. Most people who domestic violence, rape, things like that, murder, the violence that they experienced is traumatic. So they were victims. They grow up or at a young age, and then they become the one adding violence. And it's a vicious cycle. Yeah.
I struggle with the forgiveness piece for the same reasons that a lot of people struggle with the forgiveness piece, because some things are so horrible, you don't know how that you can do it. The only way that I can distill it down is the compassion piece.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that any of it makes any sense. And I don't even know if it's important to forgive to that extent for yourself, but if you can put yourself outside of your own situation enough to see how somebody else's existence could have gotten them to that point, that compassion piece is the only
Absolutely.
way.
I mean, I remember, for 20 years working in juvenile detention facilities, court schools, kids, right? And adult prisons. And based on various schedules over the years, there were some days where I would go from like a court school for kids in high school to an adult prison. And I'm like, oh, here you are. And these are the kids getting beaten and abused without any parental figures, positive role models, joining gangs at 8. And yet when they're 30 and they murder, we don't understand it. Well, if you put yourself in their shoes and that compassion for what they did, what they went through at that age, then you begin to understand it. And the most important, well, not the most, one important piece of compassion and forgiveness is forgiveness doesn't mean that what they did was okay or right.
It's not, you don't accept it.
You're not accepting it.
Just understanding a little bit.
Yeah. Were you gonna say something? Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So yeah, the compassion always, and in Buddhist teachings, we overcome anger with compassion. So that anger that we feel towards the monsters, we have compassion towards them for the suffering that they must be experiencing or have experienced to do the types of things that we're talking about. So, anything else before we close? Nice light stuff this evening. Yeah, go ahead.
How do you practice gratitude?
How to practice gratitude?
How do you personally?
Oh, how do I practice gratitude personally? Let me respond to this real quick, and then I'll go back to that. There's a question here. It says, when you are triggered, how do you disconnect from your emotions on the spot and not explode? So I'll just say briefly on that before we wrap up here, is that one, you're not disconnecting from your emotions. You're actually connecting to them. You're seeing them, you're feeling them, you're recognizing them, and you're choosing to sit with them. So, a question like this, and then I'll come back to gratitude and close. A question like this, I couldn't even tell you how many people come in here week after week after week and ask these questions. How do you? And my response is, you must cultivate a daily meditation practice. The mistake most people make is they want to intellectually understand, how can I forgive? How can I have gratitude? How can I not explode? Well, meditation is learning to sit with emotions as they arise. So if you want to understand how to do these things, you have to continue to deepen your meditation practice. Because when you sit in meditation, not just once a week, and an actual meditation, not a falling asleep, not a relaxation, not a I'm just going to kick back and zone out, but wake up. Actually train your mind to be present. And watch your emotions as they arise. Happiness, sadness, anger, joy. Watch them. And you know what you do with them? Nothing. When you train your mind to do that day in and day out, year after year after year, when you get triggered, as you say, you will see, oh, there's a trigger. Oh, what am I going to do with that? Oh, I'm going to feel angry. What am I going to do with this anger? Nothing. I'm going to sit. But if you just show up and intellectually try to put this stuff into your life, you're going to be asking questions the rest of your life. So, gratitude. How do I practice gratitude in my life? I don't even know. I just see it every day, like in everything. Like I'm grateful for, I see this zafu, this meditation cushion. And I'm grateful for Robert Frank, who 15 years ago said, at the downtown temple, said, we really need some comfortable cushions. And he started bringing his own. And then he wanted a comfortable chair. So he brought his own. But then he was like, wait a minute. Everybody should be comfortable. So he said, how many do you need? And he got them for everybody. The one you're sitting in right now was bought by somebody 15 years ago because he wanted to be comfortable. I look up at the Tonkas and I think of Carolyn and Richard and their entire lives that made that come to be. I look at this wood thing right here and I think about the people that in 1926 decided they wanted to build this place. And in 1927 built it. And here we are 96 years later. So for me as a practitioner, this is the emptiness practice. Most people just come up and sit on a chair. And we think it's just a chair for our butts. But what's in the chair? What's behind the chair? How did the chair even come to be? How did the floor come to be? How did this panel come to be? How did everyone in your life come to be? Gratitude is understanding the causal relationship of all phenomena in everything and everyone. And then you can't help but be grateful because you begin to recognize that without a million other people, places, and things, we don't exist. But all we do is think like, I'm angry, right? Please help me. No, it's not about us. It's not about us. And when you stop taking life about you, then this practice begins. So that's my answer right now. Yeah. All right, I'm going to close on that. We'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to Molly and her mother during their difficult time. May their family be at peace and free from suffering. All right. before you all head out, a few quick announcements. Sorry I went a little long. I'm grateful for you all staying. So our Dharma Bum host, Robin, will make a few announcements. Thanks, Robin.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robin, tonight's host. We opened the Dharma Bum Temple 17 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and are not looking for students. They're simply practitioners sharing their interpretation of the practice. Every night we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone battling addiction, and our food redistribution program is every Thursday at 5 p.m. We have classes and programs every day, and everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and also posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. We also have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it and then bring it back whenever you're done with it. Please straighten your seat or cushion before you head out, and if a few people could stay to close and latch the windows, that would be helpful. Thank you for being here. We wish you well and hope to see you again.
Thanks, Robin. Thank you all.